All right, welcome to lesson 2 of Unit 5. We're moving on to the investigate here for lists. Our last lesson was obviously the explore, where we were just kind of introducing what lists look like, both in pseudocode and then in JavaScript as well. And so today our goal is to actually get some hands-on experience in writing some code. So real quick, we're just going to rehash. So what are lists? Also some similarities between lists and variables. And when I say similarities, what I'm really talking about is they are the same thing, right? Variables, in a very general sense, are just things that store information for us, of which lists very much do that. Maybe a better question would be, what are some similarities between what we call primitives, so storing a string or storing a number in JavaScript, versus lists. And so the difference is obviously lists can store a whole bunch more information all in one nice encapsulated bundle. And so they help me manage complexity, because if you can imagine us having a program that takes 10 or 20 or 100 different things in as input, I don't want to make variables for all those, so I can use a list. On top of that, lists are dynamic. Going into a program, if we didn't have lists, you have to know how many variables you're declaring, versus now I can create a list, and then as the program runs, I can take in input from the user and change the number of things that I'm storing then. So that's how lists really allow us to manage complexity of the program. They kind of set us up to scale if we need to. So what we're going to talk about is length first. And so we got a video here, so Brendan is going to take it away.
One of the benefits of lists is that their length can grow and shrink over the course of a program. But that means it can be useful to find the length of a list at a given point in time. You can get the length for a list like this: numList.length. When your program runs, the computer will replace this with the current length of the list. In this case, the length of the list is 6. A potential point of confusion is that even though the length of the list is 6, the last index is 5. This is because we start the indexing at 0. Because lists change size, a common issue in programming with lists is, what's the index of the last element? We typically find out using the expression list.length -1, and you frequently see it used to access the last element of the list like this: numList, and in square brackets, numList.length -1. Lists are a very powerful way to store and maintain data in programs. They open the door for us to write programs that use and process lots and lots of information, especially when we don't know ahead of time just how much information needs to be stored. Let's try them out.
Okay, so there's a couple things worth noting here before we move on. One is the fact that in almost every programming language that exists out there, we start our indexing for lists, or what other languages would call arrays, at 0. However, in the College Board's infinite wisdom, they have decided to sometimes start their indexing in pseudocode for lists at 1. So it's just something to keep in mind. Usually when they do that, they'll have it stated ahead of time, so like they'll have a note in there that the indexing is starting at 1. If not told otherwise, just assume that indexing starts at 0. That is what, well, honestly, I haven't run into a programming language that doesn't start at 0. So just keep that in mind. Just be aware of it whenever you're looking at pseudocode, so like when we do our formatives, and just be aware of that fact. So what we're going to do is we're going to now navigate to code.org. You're going to navigate to lesson 2. Stages 2 and 3 of this lesson have 2 different apps that we're going to look at. So what I need you guys to do is first find a partner that you're going to look at an app with, and then find another pair as well, because one of the pairs is going to look at one of the apps, and one of the pairs is going to look at the other app. So find a partner, and then also find another pairing to work with, and you're going to take a look at these two apps here. So one of them is this outfit picker. What you're going to do is just run it first, read through the code, try to make sense of the code, and then be able to answer these questions. There's also one small thing that you're going to edit down here, and then the other group will do the same thing for this second app here. You're going to run it, read through the code, make sense of it, and then answer the questions. And then we'll come back together. You'll spend a couple minutes explaining this to the other group, and then I'll say some things about them. So this is, I'm gonna set a timer for you guys here. I'm gonna give you guys, how many do I want to give you? I'm gonna give you guys 6 minutes to do this. Okay, so go ahead and take 6 minutes. Starting now. Go. All right, time's up. So what I want you guys to do now is find your other pair and share out with how your app works. I'm gonna give you guys 4 minutes to do it. I want you guys to pay special attention to obviously how the list is being used, and then also I want you guys to compare and contrast between your two apps. How information is stored in the list. Okay, so go ahead and get the other group a good understanding of what is going on with your app, and I'm gonna give you 4 minutes to do that. So go ahead and get started. All right, I'm gonna hit some of the highlights here. So if I go back to the outfit picker app here, so these. Well, first off, let's just read through how I would read the code here. So what we start here is we've defined our two lists, which have nothing in them. And I have my two indices that are going to keep track of where I'm at. And so I'm going to start jumping around now because I start calling functions. So the very first thing I do is call fill list, which is down here. And so this is one of the big differences between the two apps, is that they fill their lists in different ways. What this one does is they call this function here, and then they append all these items, which seems like a lot of code, but all of this gets called just once. I fill the list at the very beginning, and then I never touch this function again, so that's fine. So I append all my items to my to list, and then I go to my update screen function, which is back down here as well. And so then I'm just setting my screen up to start off with, which is starting at index 0, so setting the top to be that picture and setting the bottoms to be that picture, and then actually displaying those. Yeah, it fills it a little bit differently than the other one, but it's not any more complicated. It just looks more complicated. It's less easily read. And then the interesting part is my buttons here. So my, let's see. So I have my, let's just focus on the left top and right top buttons. And so what you'll notice here is that if I hit my left button, I'm just decrementing my index by 1 each time, unless I am not greater than 0. For the reason for that is I obviously don't want to go past 0 for my index. If I'm at 0, I can't go any further to the left. And the same thing for my right index, is that if I want to move to the right, go past whatever my length was, then I'm out of bounds. I don't want to do that either. And so one of the things I asked you to modify was to edit it so that for the tops, if we get back to 0, I want to start actually back over at the other end. And so this is going to be an important skill that you guys actually use in one of your projects later. But it's just as simple as looping back around. And so what I want to do is that if my index is not greater than 0, that means that my only option is that it's back all, or it's at 0, because I couldn't have gone any further to the left than that. I can add an else statement here, and what I can do is set it to be whatever the end of my list is then. So my tops index, that's not how you spell index, my tops index I'm going to set to be equal to, well, what's the rightmost value that I can have? Well, it's my tops list.length minus 1 would be the last index. And so this will set it all the way to the right. And so when I run this, hopefully I did this right, I will start back over. And so I can completely cycle through these. Now, obviously, I run into the issue if I go to the right, that this is as far as I can go. And so I can obviously edit this one. It didn't ask me to do this, but I can. So that if I get too far, I can just set my tops index to be 0. And then this will work out nicely for me. So I can cycle all the way through that way. I can cycle all the way through this way. And if I did for my bottoms as well, that would be great. But yeah, this is so I can cycle through my list. Not too bad. And then if I go and look at my band namer app, the big difference here again is how they initialized my list. And so it looks significantly less complicated because I only did this all in only 2 lines here, although it's doing the exact same thing. It's just adding all my values to the list. One thing they did interesting was that they use a random number generator then, where my bounds are 0 and then the last item in the list, which is just the length minus 1. Okay, so both of these use arrays, lists, and they use 2 lists to display some information. So, all right, next thing then, let's go back to presenting this, is, you guys already discussed. All right, so now what we're going to do is get some practice with actually being able to update our list. So Brendan's going to tell us a little bit more about that.
You can also assign or update a particular index's value. You refer to the slot the same way. Names at index 0 gets the value Sarah would replace the current value at index 0, just like assigning a new value to a variable. Once you have created a list, you can modify it by adding items, removing items, or inserting items. To add an item to a list, you can use the append item function. Let's add Kelly to the end of the list of names like this. Append item names Kelly. Notice that append item is a function that accepts two parameters, the list name and the actual value that you want to add. Appending an item always adds the value to the end of the list. To remove an item, you use, wait for it, the remove item function. If we want to remove Josh from the list of names, we'd need to know the index where Josh is stored, so we could do this. Remove item names 1. When you remove items, the whole list shrinks and it closes the gap of the item that was removed. Now our list has 4 items, indexed 0 through 3. Because the list shrank, items that come after the removal point are effectively re-indexed. So if we once knew that Kelly was stored at index 4, Kelly is now at index 3. This is not a problem, but something to be mindful of. We can also insert items into the middle of the list with insert item, like this. Insert item names to Brooke. The insert item function needs 3 parameters, the name of the list, the index you want the new item to appear at, and the value to insert. Inserting an item grows the size of the list. Similar to remove item, the items in the list that come after the insertion point will be re-indexed. Because indexes are just numbers, you can put anything in between the square brackets that evaluates to a number, like variables or even arithmetic expressions. For example, let's say we're keeping track of temperature readings in a location with a variable called loc. var loc gets 3. We can change the value in numList at index loc like this. numList at loc gets 1.
All right, so we have one last thing that we want to look at. So there's this PairMaker app, which is going to require you to understand how I can make a list and then add or remove values to it. And so this one's actually going to take you guys a decent amount of time, but it's the last thing that we're going to do. So if you want to navigate to level number 5, then what I want you to do is run the app, see how it works, read through the code, and then there's a series of questions here that I would like you guys to look at and discuss in your pairs. And then we'll see if we have time for you guys to discuss that with someone else as well. But there's also 2 changes that you're going to make. The change what names are available. The default is pretty easy, but then this one is slightly more interesting. So I'm going to actually give you guys 12 minutes. So if you get through that, the reading the code and talking about it with your partner, and then you have time, go ahead and discuss that with another group. But make sure you make those changes as well. So here's 12 minutes. Go for it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for you guys. I'm going to answer some of these more important questions just because some of these things are new and they threw them in here for you to kind of decipher. So let's start with this. What does this dot join do and why is it important here? So what dot join does is that it's being called on a list. And this is something we'll talk more about later. But we've seen kind of functions used in two different ways. One is this insert item function, for example, where it takes in the list as what we're going to call a parameter. And again, this is something that we're going to talk a lot more about in 2 units time. But it takes in the list as a parameter versus this is actually being called upon a list. And so this is actually a dot operator because it's taking this function and calling it on, I want to move it, on this list. But again, don't worry too much about that now. But what it's doing is it's joining together, that's why it's called join, all the items in that list with the connector being the new line character. And so what it's doing is essentially taking the first item, appending a new line to it, taking the second item, appending a line to it, and putting those all together. And so when it displays each item on a line. And the reason this is important is that you could write your own string that concatenates these all together. The issue is you don't know how many things are in here. And this is the whole point about lists, is that I don't know how many things are in my list. I want it to be able to grow so that it's however many items. It could be 100 items, I don't care. But this will concatenate them all together using the new line character and then displaying them that way. So that's why it's important here. And that's why it's important for this code to be able to run. Okay. Then here's the other thing, these two things, options and index. So on line 7, we are setting the property so this is the options property, and we're just setting it to be the people list. Okay. And so the drop-down menu has a property called options, and we can set it to not just be the one option, but to actually be a whole set of options, which in this case is a list. Okay, so this is another function that we're using lists in, but this has to be a list, this parameter does. So it's setting all the options to be that list. The other one that's very similar, but a little bit different, is on lines 18 and 19. So right here, we're getting the property, and so normally whenever we get something from the drop-down, we're getting whatever has been selected. But in this case, we're getting the index of the thing that's been selected. And so you can imagine that the things in my list are indexed in the exact same way that my lists are indexed. And so the first item will be at index 0, and the next one will be at index 1, and so on. And so this matches up exactly with my list that's in there. Then this part I feel like is self-explanatory. If I obviously run out of these, then that's no good. So modifying this, then I feel like modifying, you're just adding a new thing up here. That's no big deal. The question is, how would I modify this to be 3 things? And so, well, number 1, I'd have to change this number. This has to be 3. And then number 2, we would have to basically do all this work again. So I'm going to get another random thing. So I'm going to call this, though, index. So this is my 3rd one, and this is my 3rd one. And then, yeah, so I'm doing that all again. Oh, this needs to be 3 as well. So I'm doing exactly what I did before, and then I just need to print this out. So I'm just going to be incredibly lazy. And actually, I need the pluses there as well. Control C. Okay. Control V. And 3. All right, let's see if this works. Run. And assign random pair. Yeah, you and me and another person. Perfect. Okay. So, yeah, that's all it was. No big deal. All right, let's talk about the last 2 things as I'm running out of time here real quick. So the last things I would take a glance at is these kind of patterns. We're going to be using these a lot. which is using random numbers to access things in a list, which you saw, I think, twice now, one in this last program and then once in the band name picker. But it's going to be very common, and I just always have to keep in mind off by one errors are going to be, obviously common here. If I use length instead of length minus 1, for example. And then the other one is this scrolling thing that we talked about back in the outfit picker app. So being able to kind of cycle around, it's not in here, but if I want to be able to cycle back around to the start, this just moves linearly left to right. So these are two big things that we're going to be using a lot. So that was our second look at lists. Our next lesson then will be actually practicing these things, and so you'll get a little bit more code to look at and work with. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good introduction. Hope you took some things away from it, and then we'll bring back any questions you guys have into the next lesson.